understand we have Ann Murphy to talk to us about climbing trees, is that right?
Right.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me back. And let us begin with prayer. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. And let's just gently close our eyes and take a deep breath. And let's just move into our heart spaces as my words become your words. I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge thy presence and thy power, O blessed Spirit, and from thy divine wisdom now erase my mortal limitations, and from thy pure substance of love bring into manifestation my world according to thy perfect law. And if we just take these words into our heart, and as we breathe, just know that the presence of the living God abides right within us. And also that Spirit of the living God connects us to each other here present. And we say, thank you, Divine Spirit, Mother, Father, God, for this moment. And we're open to your presence. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, again, thank you for inviting me back. Before I forget, I wanted to invite you. I'm doing a book study on the Four Agreements in Foley, Alabama, at a little coffee shop called Lovey's Vintage Brew. It's just a little bit south of the Tanger Outlets. It'll be on the right-hand side of the street, and it's behind the Honey Baked Ham place. Yeah. So if you're welcome to come, we have sometimes 10, 12, sometimes 6, 8, depends. You know, we have a nice group, and it'll run for 6 weeks. Okay, so again, thanks for inviting me back. I usually start with a story of some type. I love to tell stories. And so some friends of mine, Dave and Pat, a senior couple, and they used to like to have their dinner early, like around 5 o'clock. And then around 7 o'clock in the evening, they would typically have a snack. And sometimes it was just like a cookie, or sometimes if they were really hungry, it would be something big. So, and they would take turns preparing the snack. So this day, it was Pat's turn to prepare the snack. So Dave says to her, he says, honey, I know your memory's gotten really pretty bad lately, and I want you to write this down, because he says, I'm really hungry and I want to have a hot dog. And I want you to put mustard on it and ketchup, and I want you to put onions and sauerkraut. And I think you better write it down. She says, no, Dave, I'm fine. I'll go in. So she went into the kitchen, and she was gone for a long, long, long time. And she came back, and she had an ice cream sundae with chocolate syrup and whipped cream. And he looks at her, he says, oh, thank you, honey, but I told you should have written it down. You forgot the cherry. Can anybody relate to that? Okay, so memory is tricky, isn't it? They say that in our lives we only remember like 30% of our lives. And a lot of what we remember has been told to us, like when we were children, or, it isn't really our true memory. But I think a memory is really, really important to me. And I think that we sometimes associate certain items or certain things in our past with our memory. I think the last time I was here, I talked about how our sense of smell, where we associate a lot of our memories, that we can smell rose bushes, and we remember being in a rose garden or in our yard when we were a child, or we can smell a turkey. I think you were making the turkey last time I was here, and you smell the turkey, and it brings back memories of your family and your gatherings together. And sometimes it's actually items that bring you back, like a playground or a house or a school. But for me, my memories my wonderful memories are come from trees. And I have begun to think in my life that trees have been my teachers in many, many ways. If you just think about it, trees are so much like us. Some of them are just absolutely extraordinary on the outer, but we know that the real truth of them lies in the invisible. And trees have their roots, that go deep into the ground, and from those roots they get all of their nourishment. And for us, our roots are our spiritual roots, which go deeply into spirit, into God. And those roots connect us to each other and to all that is. Now, the first tree that I remember being very fond of was when I was a very small girl in the house that I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois. And the houses on the block where I lived were set on very narrow 32-foot wide lots. And they were sturdy brick bungalows. And in the front there was a very tiny postage stamp size front yard. And in the back there was a small backyard that was bordered by an alley. Well, in that home there was, at the very back, bordering on the alley and leaning up against a fence, was a mulberry tree. And when I think of the mulberry tree, I remember the berries falling onto the sidewalk in the summer, and they would sizzle, and they would give up this sweet, sweet aroma. And when I think of mulberries, or I think of that tree, I'm reminded of my carefree summers when I was a little child, of the Good Humor Man, and the bell, and watermelon, and just lots of fun. Well, next to the mulberry tree, my dad had placed a sandbox, and that's where we played. I was the second of 5 children, and the summer that I'm going to tell you about was the summer that I turned 4 years old. And at that time, my brother had just turned 5, so he was allowed to be outside of the fenced-in yard. But I wasn't old enough yet, so I was restricted to the yard. And then I had a younger brother who was 11 months younger than myself, and my mom had a baby that spring. So she had another child 2 years later. So she had 5 children in 7 years. So she was a little bit overtaxed. Yeah, right, just a bit. So my brother was always my hero, because he was very adventuresome and he was very outgoing. There wasn't a shy bone in his body, and I was the shy little girly, person. And my brother used to climb trees and ride his bike, and he never really had a lot of time for me. I was this little girly girl. So I used to watch him climb the tree, the mulberry tree, and I always thought, oh, that would be really wonderful if I could do that. He would just go over to the fence and just scoot up on the fence and hop onto the branches. Now, to me, when I was 4 years old, or not quite 4, it was an enormous tree. But by adult standards, it was very, very small, very, very tiny tree. And so one day, I was alone in the sandbox, and I was playing with my hollyhocks. Do you remember hollyhocks? You can make little dolls out of them. Yeah. And I was making like a tea set. And what I lacked in being adventuresome, I really gained in having a vivid imagination. So as I was sitting there, I was listening to the sights and the sounds all around me. And I heard some noises out on Division Street, the street nearest to us, busy street. And I started thinking, oh, that's probably the boogeyman. And my brother used to always try to scare me with the boogeyman. And then I heard a dog barking. And I thought, oh, that dog's going to jump the fence and come and get me. So I was creating for myself this little scenario. And then I kept looking up at the tree. And then I heard a call. Hey, Ann, was my mom. She says, I want you to stay in this yard. I'm going to try to take a nap. I said, okay, Mommy, okay. And I knew she was in the house. And so I got up from the sandbox and cautiously walked to the tree. And I hiked myself up on the rung of the fence and got up onto a branch. And I was able to look out down the alley. I was able to see the dog, and it was about this big. And I was able to see over to Division Street, and the noises that I thought were gypsies were just the sounds of traffic. And so I wish I could tell you that I had a lot of adventuresome moments like that in my young childhood, but I really didn't. I really stayed within the confines of the sandbox. And I think perhaps all of us do that. We allow ourselves to get caught up in the rigid roles of gender and sexuality, Levantine beliefs, fear-based rules in our little sandbox. And the sandbox, of course, grows to include the block and then the school and the church and political parties and this and that and everything. And then we start making assumptions about ourselves and about our environment. And we start believing that we're not smart enough, we're not thin enough, we're not good enough. And we begin to have a belief that there isn't enough. There isn't enough love, there isn't enough abundance, there isn't enough joy. But that day, I attained a higher perspective on life. And Unity author Eric Butterworth tells a story about, he lived in New York City, had a big ministry in New York City. Used to speak at one of the big like concert halls, Avery Coomley, I forget the name, I think it's that. And when he would have guests come to New York City, he would always take them to either the Empire State Building or one of the other high buildings in the city. And he'd take them in the evening, and they would look out and they'd see New York City with all of its lights, just aglow and sparkling. And he says that after they saw that from that perspective, that they would have a positive outlook about the entire city. They would remember that glow. They would remember that sparkle. And it was always a positive outcome for them. So he writes, he says, contemplate all changing, challenging experiences from the highest point of view. Regardless of appearances of conflict or limitation, see all things from an awareness of the allness of life and the ever-presence of substance. From the view from the top, you see things creatively, leading to an attitude that is constructive and optimistic. And the other thing that I like to define prayer is from Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. So there's my climbing trees. I actually started a book called Climbing Trees. Yeah, I have one chapter done. I have the introduction and one chapter. So as I said, I pretty much conformed, pretty much stayed in the sandbox, rigid rules, etc. Until I discovered Unity in 1991. And there I discovered a higher perspective for myself. And I wanted to read to you the daily word that inspired me to continue attending Unity. And it said, I was experiencing, first I was going through a divorce, and I also had found out that the doctor told me I had cancer at this time. So it says, the Christ within me is the open door to invigorating life. I experience wholeness and zest for living. My body is uniquely and wonderfully created. I have many of the characteristics and traits of my human family. However, there is much more to me. This more is my divine inheritance from God. This is the most significant thing that ever has happened to me in my life. I mean, I had been raised in Christianity, but nobody ever told me that, that I had this divine inheritance. I was, like I think I mentioned to you, I'm a wave in the ocean of God. We each are a wave in the ocean of God. The essence of who I am is the Christ nature that is at the very core of my being. In any health challenge, I call upon the healing power within me. Divine intelligence guides me to act in ways that promote health. I am led to and through a process of healing that is effective and right for me. I am open and receptive to all sources of good, for all good comes from God. I visualize my body as the perfect expression of health that God created it to be, knowing and affirming that there is no challenge too great for my inner resources to heal. I experience wholeness and zest for living now. And from Isaiah chapter 58, verse 8, your healing shall spring up speedily. And I think I told you I was given a daily word when I was attending a 12-step program, and I put it away like in a drawer in a purse, and then I was recovering from my surgery, and I found it, and this was in that, so it was a divine intervention. So Unity's given me many, many gifts. First of all, the concept of prayer and healing, but most importantly, a concept about myself, that I'm a child of God, created in the image and likeness of God. And it also gave to me a metaphysical and metaphorical interpretation of the scriptures. So I'm going to do one for you today. Do you do it very often, the metaphysical? Yeah, okay. So this is the story of, remember the story of Moses as he's leading the Israelites out of Egypt into the promised land. And this is the Lord, this is Numbers chapter 13, that'll be chapter 13 and 14. The Lord said to Moses, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each of their ancestral tribes you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord, and all of them leading men among the Israelites. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up there into the land, up to the hill country, and see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land they live in is good or bad, and whether the towns that they live in are unwalled or fortified, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be bold and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now is the season of the first ripe grapes. At the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekite live in the land of Negev. The Hittites, whatever, so. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the man who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against these people, for the land that they had spied on, saying the land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim, the Anakites, to themselves seem like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Then all of the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into a land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become booty. So they said to one another, let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the Israelites. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, however you say it, and they were among those who had spied on the land, tore their clothes, and said to the congregation, "The land that we went through as spies is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are no more than bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us." But the whole congregation threatened to stone them. So we have the metaphysics of the story, which is we are all the Israelite people. We are all searching for God. We're all the Israelites people. The Jewish people are not the chosen people. We're all the Israelite people. And I believe deep within each and every one of us is that quest for God. That sometimes we go to strange doors to fulfill it. We go to alcohol and drugs, and we go to addictions, and we go to collecting things. But really, deep within us is a need and a yearning for connection to God. So we're all the Israelite people. And Egypt represents, according to Charles Fillmore, and if we interpret it metaphysically, it represents sense consciousness, which is lack and fear. Now, when they were in Egypt, everything was taken care of for them because they were slaves. And so then they're presented with something new, and it created fear for them. And so Moses, we remember the story of Moses. He was drawn out of the river when he was in the Moses basket. He was saved. And so that Moses represents the drawing out, the part of us that seeks that higher perspective. And Caleb, who the only two, Joshua and Caleb, are the only two of the Israelites who continue on to the promised land. And Caleb represents that part of us that's brave, that's bold and fearless. The one, he would probably like to have climbed trees a lot. And Joshua means I am that I am. And that Joshua is the identical name to Jesus. So he represents that higher level of consciousness that always seeks to see from the higher perspective. It represents our emerging consciousness. Now, I always wondered why Moses didn't make it to the promised land. And it was because it was his role. Now, when we interpret the Bible metaphysically, we think of it is the story of our evolving consciousness from the Adam man to the Christ. So each of these characters represent some aspect of ourselves. So we have within us the Moses that is there to help draw us out our Christ consciousness. And we have the Caleb that's brave and fearless and willing to take risks. And we have the Joshua, when we can finally connect with that I am, truly realize that we are a wave in the ocean of God. And this is from Charles Fillmore. He says, and when I think of this story, I think that Joshua and Caleb climbed one of those trees when they were there in the promised land. So they didn't create the giants. They were able to see with spiritual vision. They were able to see the possibilities and the potential available to them. So Charles Fillmore says, in the beginning of our journey from sense consciousness to spiritual consciousness, from Egypt to the promised land, not all of these religious thoughts are Israelites striving for God, are awake to spiritual truth. So it's a gradual process, it's a step-by-step process, and sometimes we have changes or things come up in our lives and we kind of fall back, and we can kind of relate to those Israelites who wanted to return back to their comfort zones, to what was comfortable for them. But spiritual growth is not about comfort. Those of you in this room, I'm sure you know that. It's about joy and love and prosperity and all that thing, but it's not usually about comfort. It's challenging to move out of some of our old belief system and release them, and then into the joy of having the Christ present. So sometimes, first of all, to get back to the memory, I think that we have those challenging things happen in our lives that we forget for just a little while. We forget why we're here, we forget who we are, And so I did this once before and people liked it. So I made a card for us so we can remember. So all it says is my declaration of my true identity. My name is, fill it in, I am a child of God, created in God's image and likeness. I am love, I am light, I am peace. Now I'll pass these out, maybe, or somebody can. I always think big, you know. So the other interesting thing is, Unity has, every year they do themes. Unity does themes. And it's the Unity World Headquarters that does the themes. It's not the Unity Worldwide Ministries. People get confused about that. Now they're in the same place. They're both at Unity Village, which is really, really nice. Unity Worldwide Ministries has offices now at Unity Village. But the theme for this year is 2020 Perfect Vision. Seen through a spiritual lens. Seen through a spiritual lens. So I wanted to tie that into my message, and that we all can climb our trees to see from a more spiritual perspective. And I don't remember how last time I climbed a tree. But you get the general idea, to be brave and to move past some of our fears. And okay, well, let's do our meditation now then. And let's just take a deep breath. And as we breathe, let's just allow our bodies to relax. And just allow your chair to support you. And if it's comfortable for you, just breathe into your heart space, located at the center of your chest. In the 12 powers, the heart space is the center of our love. That healing, harmonizing energy that connects us to spirit and to each other and to all that is. And as we breathe into our heart space, perhaps you'll have a sense of spaciousness. A sense of relaxation. We just affirm that this is our time, a time to just be present. Nothing to do or strive for, but just to be present. To the living, loving presence of the divine within. And as we're sitting in our chairs, allowing our chairs to support us, we may begin to have a sensation that we are not supported by the chair, but supported by a living, loving God. And as we set aside our concerns of the day, we are wrapped in an embrace by the loving presence in each now moment. And as we rest in this now moment, we may just have a glimpse of a memory when we were one with Spirit. Free of our earth suit. Just bathed in the living, loving presence. And we have a memory that we made a promise to come to that little blue planet that we saw out on the horizon. And we were to bring our loving presence to a world that so needed us. And we would forget for a moment or for a while that loving connection that we had, the truth of who we are. And then we gradually remember. And let's just rest in the silence as we remember. And we remember in each situation, in each challenge, that we can make the decision to love, to express the truth of who we are. We will be gently brought out of meditation and have the opportunity to affirm that thought as we sing together, "Love is my decision."